So I run the Goldhirsh Foundation, which is a private family foundation here in Los Angeles. We support social innovation in LA. And this is actually the first time that I've talked about the work that we do in this way. So this is a work in progress. I used to have Fran Siegel, whom some of you may know, who's now running the Ford Foundation's Impact Alliance, Impact Investing Alliance. I used to have her on my investment committee, and we talked about the nuances of the term impact investing. And I've just decided to go with investing with purpose to make it really easy and very flexible and nimble for all of us involved. So, and I also want to say, I think that this is a really interesting discussion in that Brent helped really define some of the terms out there and some of what we're trying to address, and Maggie brought some of these to life. And what I'm doing with you today is I'm going to take you through the journey that I'm currently on with the foundation and how we are testing. So first I want to frame the discussion with a few principles that we keep in mind. And these principles are also a little bit of a caveat of the flexibility with which we approach our work. So I'm borrowing from Stephen Covey, begin with the end in mind. And this is really about what is it that you are trying to achieve, and then how would a funder like I try to match your needs. And so when we talk about financial terms, we have a number of tools at our disposals, and foundations do, and other funders do. And these include grants and loans, investments, and then contracts, fee-for-service, or other types of in-kind work. So to kind of tease out grants and how we can talk about beginning with the end in mind, excuse me, we have a number of different tools with grants. We can make grants to for-profit. So we can do this via something called expenditure responsibility or something called fiscal sponsorship. And some of these can be a little controversial. I was actually told by a philanthropic colleague in an open forum that one thing we had done, making a grant to a for-profit, was illegal, and it actually was not illegal, but it's just not a common practice. Another thing we do with grants is we use grants to match or make challenge grants so that we incentivize and encourage other people to get involved. So we might issue a match grant when we talk with the person to whom we're going to give the grant and say, how can we best leverage our funds to help you reach a broader audience and help you bring more funds into the fold. So we might do a one-to-one dollar match up to a certain amount, or we might say, you need to raise $50,000, $25,000, $100,000, and then that releases our funds. And we're also trying to look at grants and our investments and all of our financial resources similarly and try to bring them together in one cohesive strategy. So another thing is loans. There was an organization here at LACI that I'll talk about a little bit later, Isidore Recycling. And we provided Kabira Stokes, who started Isidore Recycling, was a B Corp, and yeah, you might remember her. Kabira actually had some issues that I'm sure she or others would be happy to share with B Corps, and I'm a big fan of B Corps as well, but B Corp, but she had some issues with finding the right funders to understand what she was doing in this interesting financial structure. So we've given some loans. We also make investments, and this is typically, from a foundation's perspective, a very different side of the house. It's usually a different staff. Because we're a very small foundation, have a very small staff, I run our investment committee and work with our 5 volunteer investment professionals from outside who form our investment committee. I also work with our wealth advisor and our board. So I have this opportunity to look across the board at all of our financial assets, but the investments are really made to generate the returns that will then enable us to do the grant making. That's how most foundations really are run. Then on the last point, in financial assets, we can also provide contracts. So we could contract with a business, whether we're the first client into a particular business to prove a concept, or we can provide a grant or a contract to a government entity to hire that startup. Or we can work with a grantee and say, we've given you grant dollars, we're also interested in this startup and potentially figuring out a way to launch this startup in a way that would be of mutual benefit to both of you. So a lot of testing, experimentation. Function over form is basically, with that, begin with the end in the mind. What are your needs and how might you be able to achieve that? The other thing is the golden rule, and I'm just a big fan of the golden rule, period, but especially when it comes to the funding-funder relationship, I think it's really important to be very direct and respectful and clear about expectations. So I will tell people straight up, we're not going to fund you. I don't want you to waste your time, and I don't want you to waste my time. And I do that because I came from a fundraising background, and it was hard to put someone on my warm list and then realize they're not on my warm list. I would just rather know right up front, we're not going to get married. This is better to know up front. And then I also believe I want to be the funder that I wish I had been able to find. When I first moved to Los Angeles, I started an education reform network that had a lot of promise, but I needed a very small amount of money. I needed like a laptop and someone to help me with what was my Yahoo groups then. I mean, that's how long ago it was. And I didn't fit into a traditional mold. I wasn't a 501c3. There was no B Corp at that, or maybe there was, it was just very early on. And I was a sole operator. I was deriving income from events and from job postings on my Yahoo groups, but no one could really place me in the world. So I really I strive to remember what I was facing, and I strive to think about how can we kind of extend a hand to people who have a great idea, who might be promising in one particular endeavor. And then the last is that I've heard a lot of people say, oh, that's crazy. And I feel like when I hear that's crazy, I'm on the right track. So I think a lot of you are probably in the situation that people think your ideas might be crazy or your model might be crazy. And I just want to remind you, there's the quotation about that the day before something becomes a breakthrough, it's a crazy idea. So just remember that. And I've been working on a compensation plan for my foundation, and in working with our legal counsel, she said, Tara, you guys are unlike 99% of your peers, so it's really hard to place you. And I said, yeah, and I think people think that we're a little bit crazy sometimes, but we use technology to do our grants. We use social media a lot, but I just think that's our flavor. That's what ignites me, and that's what excites me, and that's where I feel I can provide value. So go with the crazy. So kind of just take a step back. So we're a $60 million endowment, and we, as a private foundation, we are obligated by law to give away 5% every year, or give away or dedicate to charitable expenses. So that's about $3 million. We give away $1 million in the My LA 2050 Grants Challenge, which, has anyone here applied for the My LA 2050? Good, okay, great. Okay, thank you, keep it up, that's right. And Z actually just won an honorable mention, I have to say, in the My LA 2050 Grants Challenge, so I'm very happy about that. Yay! So I encourage you to check that out. But that takes up a large percentage of our grant-making budget, because then the rest of the rest of the $3 million also goes to our rent and staff and whatnot. But we really think about ourselves with Goldhirsh Foundation as almost like a venture capital fund for social good. We have done a really deep dive into a self-assessment of what are the assets and the forms of capital we can offer. And I think Maggie talked about this a bit about, and I was especially, I thought the TaskRabbit example was especially evocative of this, like what's core to you and what can you offer? Or the woman who's dedicating her retail space, because we all have something to give. So when I've talked about our financial capital, our loans and our grants and our investments, but we also have tremendous social capital, and part of this comes from the digital assets that we've built from the ground up, where we really do promote and amplify the work of organizations who come to us, whether we've granted them or not, or invest in them or not. We really try to amplify and promote the good work that's going on. We do that via newsletter, via digital assets, and the My LA 2050 Grants Challenge. We also make introductions to other funders. And then our human capital. We are a very small team, but we try to get involved and try to make our grantees and investees think of us as extended capacity for the team. In so doing, we want to know the good and the bad and the ugly. And it's upsetting to me when people hide the ugly, because we all have ugly and plans fall apart in midstream, and we want to help. If we've made an investment in you, we're there and we want to help, and we want transparency. And we expect that in a bidirectional way. So we can also provide some strategic counsel or operational advice, and we do whatever we can. And it's to the point of we are trying to do the most good possible with what we've got. So I'll just take you through some examples. So the My LA 2050 Grants Challenge is our annual crowdsourced grants challenge, and this is open to for-profits, nonprofits, and government entities. And this is unusual because of the for-profit component, really. We've granted to for-profits within My LA 2050, and I was adamant about the fact that I wanted to make sure that for-profits could apply to My LA 2050. And I'd like to see more for-profits apply. So just to put that in the back of your mind for next year. As I said, the controversial grant that we did, the expenditure responsibility was to MTV when MTV was a little more relevant. And we not only were called conducting illegal activity, which the Gates Foundation and Case Foundation and a number of others were participating with us. So I said, no, we're all above board. We're being very kosher. But also the nonprofit community got upset with us because they said, why are you giving money to a for-profit company? And we said, we're going where we want to convert the audiences into doing more social good. That ultimately was sort of a failed experiment, which is also good. We are out there to take risks and to fail and to learn from those failures. And I'm very glad we did that. The other things that we've done is we've used seed funds, whether it's been grant or investment, to seed ideas where we think things can be leveraged. So I'm not sure how many are familiar with Kane's Arcade. The kid in East LA who started a cardboard arcade. Okay, yeah, so Kane was a little boy who started an arcade at his father's auto repair shop, and we were friends with the filmmaker who stumbled upon Kane, and we decided to go really big into forming an entity around Kane and inspired by Kane to find more Kanes. So we gave a large grant to an idea to a filmmaker, and we provided a lot of human and social capital to help build an organization called the Imagination Foundation, which has now developed and evolved and into a global organization. And you will see more of Imagination Foundation because they have some really exciting plans underway that I can't talk about, but I'm really happy to see that this came from an idea that we got behind. It was a big risk, and I have to say I didn't always think that we were doing the right thing, but I think we did the right thing, and we're really happy with that. Another one is SOCAP. SOCAP is the annual conference that's now been going on about 10 years. The way we got involved with SOCAP was Tim Frundlich from Califia Foundation, who's basically the founder of SOCAP. He and I were talking about 10 years ago, and I said, I think there's something about convening funders to talk about impact and investing. And part of this was selfishly motivated because we didn't really know what we were doing, and we wanted to better understand that. So I said, why don't we give you some money to convene? We can give you space, we can give you money, let's make this work. And he called me back and he said, I think we can make this a lot bigger. I think if we can take your money, we can use you as the initial sponsor, and we don't typically sponsor things, but he convinced me. He said, let's build a conference, and that conference has become SOCAP. So with a really small initial investment, where we took a risk and thought, this sounds like a good idea, there's now been this thriving business and this conference that is ongoing. So we're thrilled. Opportunity Fund. This is a great organization. It's a grantee. It's been a My LA 2050 grantee, and I'm working on a women's entrepreneurship initiative with Opportunity Fund. They provide loans, and we're working to get more women loans. So women access 4% of bank loans, which is even more deplorable than women accessing venture capital. So we're trying to change that. We're trying to change that in Los Angeles. So I do want to encourage you to look at Opportunity Fund. They're the largest nonprofit lender, and they may help your businesses get started. And then Brand LA, I don't know if you guys know the LA Originals product line that LA has launched, LA City, but we provided a grant to the city of Los Angeles to launch a branding initiative and to come up with retail products that are now putting money back into LA. So loans. I mentioned, is it or recycling? So what Kabira called, so Brent took the question about how long some of these decisions can take, and it can take a long time. Kabira called us sort of in a panic saying, I need to make payroll. I've got this merger on the books. It's going to happen, but I'm kind of desperate, and we made the decision within a day. So to just write her, we said this is going to be an interest-free, short-term loan. We did it twice, and we had high confidence in her abilities as a leader. We believed in her model. We'd known her a long time, and we knew this merger was going to happen. We knew that this merger was contingent on her making payroll. Lost Angels is an organization that came through the My LA 2050 Grants Challenge. They do classic car restoration with Boys and Girls Clubs in Lancaster, and they were going to raffle off a car at an auto show, and they needed money to just get the supplies and buy the car and pay the kids. So we gave them a short-term loan. They paid us right back probably 6 months later after the car was raffled. Learn is the Leaders for Urban Renewal Network. They support street vendors. We're giving them a PRI or a loan, and they are going to be distributing microloans to their street vendors to help them secure like food carts or permits to get them through the permitting process. So investments, I mentioned this is a little bit trickier because it goes through a different process, and this is the one where we're the most nascent, I'd say, but I'm excited about building this out. Some of the groups that Brent talked about, Core Innovation Fund. So we've made direct investments in groups like Every Table and which is based in LA, and Zapongo, which is based in Northern California. And we've also made investments in funds like Core Innovation Fund, which has a location here in Los Angeles and supports a lot of LA-based organizations that work on economic development and housing, and then Collaborative Fund. So this is, again, still being fleshed out, but these are designed to be financial first returns for us that have some sort of a mission as well. And the last thing is this contracts or fee for service or something else. So I'll give the example of, there's a group called Compiler that's a civic tech organization here in Los Angeles. And they came to us, I don't know if they had even had any clients, and they said, we'd like you to invest in us. And I started talking with them, and I'd known the principal from this in different work and trusted her and her ideas. And we decided that would probably make the most sense for them was a proof of concept and that we could be their first client. So we contracted with them. And this was going to be of mutual benefit too, because I needed a website built. So they built the LA 2050 website. Mutual benefit, great, win-win. I'm going to invoke Stephen Covey again. So we hired Compiler, and we said, great, build a website. And so they built a website, and now they're a going concern as a business because of having our initial funds and the initial proof of concept they can point to. Innovation Week. This is something LA Economic Development Corporation did and launched about 4 or 5 years ago. They came to us and asked for sponsorship, and I said, we don't really sponsor things, and I can't really write you a check, and I'm not really sure how I can help you, but I realized I have this intern here who's hungry and tech savvy and who had a little bit of extra time, and I said, I'm going to donate my intern to you, and she can work however. So I just paid my intern to work on helping to launch the first Innovation Week, and that's now been going 4 years long. So really small investments for much larger returns. And then some other things we do, design services. We really pride ourselves on our design, and that goes back to kind of our social capital. We deal with a lot of statistics with LA 2050 and data about the things that are like environmental deterioration and homelessness and homicide rates, but we do so in a way that is actually inviting for people to learn and very accessible via design and storytelling. So one of the things we've done with different organizations, whether they've been grantees or investees or not, is that we've provided design services. So one organization needed a logo. They were launching a new entity. We helped them design a logo, a branding guide, and that just was taking someone from my staff doing that. Another thing, letter of support. We provided a grant to an organization called People for Parks, which helps work with LAUSD to open parks and school facilities on the weekends, which seems to me like a no-duh. In a park-poor city like Los Angeles, we should be able to use the recreational spaces. I understand there are a lot of insurance issues and whatnot and liability, but we provided a letter of support to People for Parks to work with the City Department of Recs and Park that then leveraged our initial $100,000 investment to get them another $75,000 in access to other parks. So there are a lot of different ways to work with funders. There are a lot of different ways to think about your own assets and resources. And I just encourage you to really tap into all of those. So thank you.